Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's computer science seminar talk. I'm going to hand it over to Alexandra to introduce our great speaker today. So, Alexandra, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you to Professor Slaughter for introducing me, and thank you you all for coming. I hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving break. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Telle Whitney. Telle Whitney is co-founder of the Grace Hopper Conference and was the CEO of the Anita Borg Institute. She is here today to give everyone a lot of great insight into her journey, as well as talk about how company and organizational culture influence how people thrive. Thank you, Telle, for coming today. It's great having you here.
Great. It's great to be here. And welcome. I'm really honored to be here. In California, it's a lot earlier than where you are. It's very early in the morning, but I'm still really looking forward to sharing my story with you and also hearing from you, hearing your questions. 2020 is an important year. It's a great year to take a step back, to reflect on what's most important to you, what's important to your school, to your community, and to the world. 2020 for me is one of the most difficult years of my life. It's as we sit back and we cannot spend time with those that we love, as we work hard to nourish our soul and find ways to do that in what is a challenging time. But here's what I know. It's during difficult times that the greatest innovation and the greatest inventions happen. That's certainly been true for me in my past. There are people all over the world who are coming up with great ideas, and we may not know about them until for some time. But what I know is that it's that resilience that's digging deep into your soul and finding ways to move forward that really makes a difference. And I would encourage each of you to think about how you want to make a difference, how you want to have an impact. I'm going to start by talking about my story and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. But then I'm also going to talk about what are the actions you can take for organizations to create cultures where all people thrive. Like you, I have a passion for computing, and I'm also a passionate entrepreneur. I'm writing a book. I'm in the process of talking to a lot of different people about their experience within technology. And so in the same way as when I talk to many young computer scientists and engineers, I'm going to start for me on my journey before college. When I was in high school, I was good at math, but I had no role models of people who were engineers or computer scientists. I mean, my father was a lawyer. I had doctors around. My mother was a history teacher. My stepmother was a piano teacher. And so I never really considered choosing computer science or engineering. But when I found computer science at the University of Utah, I knew that I had found where I belonged. One of the greatest things that happened was that a faculty member, a man named Rich Riesenfeld, noticed me, noticed my work, and he took an interest in me. He encouraged me to go to graduate school, something that I had never really considered doing. And I just hadn't even considered my future. I was just going to school. So he introduced me to a man named Ivan Sutherland, who was starting a department of computer science at Caltech. And Rich encouraged me to apply. Ivan encouraged me to apply. For me, it was a huge risk. As I said, I had never really considered going to graduate school, but I decided to take that risk. I applied to Caltech and I got in. My first year at Caltech was tough. I remember looking at all these students that were around me from MIT, from RPI, from UC Berkeley, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and thinking, well, they all know. They all know what's going on, and I don't belong here. As I walked along the hallways, I was sure that somebody was going to find me out and kick and say, you don't belong here. What I now know as I look back on that time, is that I was deep in the throes of imposter syndrome. And at the end of that first year, I passed my mini-orals, which at Caltech was the way in which you were allowed to stay in the department. And at the end of the second year, I had published 2 papers. And so I did belong. I really did do well at Caltech. And so it was the first place, and I'm going to now share my screen. Okay. Give me just a minute. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. All right. Okay. It was the first time that I had really, that I learned some of the earliest lessons. And one was the courage to take risks. That really taking that risk and going for it was one of the most important things that I did. And along with that, the courage to be imperfect. My story that I just shared, I wasn't perfect. I really did, that there were people who knew more than me, but I was willing to take that risk and go for it, even in the context of not knowing everything. And the second point is to be comfortable being uncomfortable. This has been one of the guiding principles of my life. As I think about what's possible, almost always, I'm reaching for more than where I am today, and it's very uncomfortable. And so learning to be comfortable, being uncomfortable, was one of the key lessons that I learned. After Caltech, I came to the Bay Area in California, what's often called Silicon Valley, and I was one of the early people in Silicon Valley. In those days, Silicon Valley was creating silicon. I came up here to work in a number of startups that created silicon, a number of chips started, and I thrived. I was very focused on having an impact, creating products that were making a difference. At the time, we envisioned these chips, that have become ubiquitous, and using a system-level approach, which was very novel in those days. And I mean, it's been enough time that we've seen the results of those ideas come to fruition. Those chips are in everything, your iPad, your iPhone, my car, and often in clothes. And so they're everywhere. And I was very excited to be a participant in those early days. But in semiconductors, there was not many women. And so I systematically set out to bring other women in my life, women who were technical. And I met a group of women out of Stanford University. And through that group, many of whom remain friends today, I met a woman named Anita Borg. Together, Anita and I launched the Grace Hopper celebration. The first one was held in 1994. And yes, I was a little younger in those days. But we were there to celebrate the achievements of all these remarkable women who spoke. But we're systematizing and offering to all attendees the same kind of groups that I talked about, of connecting with other women as a chance as you go forward with your career to be able to reach out to people who look like you, to find people that you can talk to. And many of the people who attended that first Grace Hopper celebration left inspired, not only inspired, but with connections that serve them during many years to come. The Grace Hopper celebration, this is in 2019, where there was well over 26,000 people. And the Grace Hopper celebration is one of the big programs of the Anita Borg Institute that I led for 15 years. I stepped down at the end of 2017. And even as it grew, many of the people that attended it came away with inspiration, being able to hear from people who are doing just the coolest kinds of work, but also connections, to be able to find other people that they can share their professional growth, the issues that they're grappling with. And it really, I had so many young women come up to me and say, this changed my life. It was one of the greatest jobs on the face of the planet. As you listen to my story and everything that I've said to date, you hear a theme, and that's about people. All this time, as I went through graduate school and then worked at a number of startups, there were people in my life that made a huge difference, the people that encouraged me. And I often think about people in terms of role models, mentors, and sponsors. Role models are people like Sally Ride, who was the first female astronaut, who I had the opportunity to meet, who was inspiring to me. Martina Navratilova, who I have never met, but was one of the greats in tennis. The people who spur me on, Sheryl Sandberg. But I also had many people who were mentors, the people who could give advice. Many of my mentors did not know that they were my mentors. I would go to them with a question and they would offer candid advice. And then last but not least are sponsors. And sponsors are people who help you get ahead in your career, who suggest you for positions that you don't even know exist. And it's a very important role. And for many people, it's a much harder role to find. I'm just going to give you some of the examples of people in my life who were role models, mentors, and sponsors. The first was Carver Mead. Carver Mead was my thesis advisor. He was a dear friend. He was an important mentor. I mean, he taught me about how you want to go back to the science, that you want to look at all problems and think about the science. Even though I didn't work in the lab, I was situated in the lab, and it was always this focus on what are the problems that you want to solve. He was also an important sponsor because Carver introduced me to the people at the first three companies that I was at. He knew people that I didn't, and he helped me greatly on my career. The second person I wanted to mention was Fran Allen. Fran Allen was the first female fellow at IBM, although she hated that term fellow, but it was still an important milestone. She spoke at the first Grace Hopper celebration, and she was the first Turing Award winner, first female Turing Award winner. And she passed away this year, but she was one of the greats. And for Fran, she always talked to me about being focused on the technology, of focused on the problem and ensuring that what you do takes the field forward. I have a lot of respect for Fran. And then two other people that are very important in my life. Maria Clave is the president of Harvey Mudd College. She was the chair of the board of Anita Borg, and she and I have created many programs together. She was there at the first Grace Hopper celebration. She and I created the BRAID program, which works with academic institutions. And then Valerie Taylor, who is the co-founder of the Center for Minorities and People with Disabilities. I serve on Valerie's board, but Valerie is a close friend and mentor. As we think about how to look at the workforce, how to look at the people who who are entering the field, she and I have had many conversations about what's important. I ask for a moment for you to take a step back and think about your own life and who are your role models? Who are your mentors? Who are your sponsors? And think about the people who are important to you. Go out and reach out. Take that risk. Get past that fear about being able to ask for help. I'm going to switch gears for just a minute and talk about how to create cultures where all people thrive and where invention is nurtured. Here's the secret that I know, is we know how to create these cultures. We know what to do, but it's still true that many places are not doing anything. I can't tell you the number of times I've looked at these diversity statements that companies have put out and then looked at what their actions are. Who's on the board? Who's on the executive staff? What's their representation in their workforce? And they are not putting meat behind those statements. And as you think about, as you take that next step in your journey, I would encourage you to ask a lot of questions about the companies that you're talking to. What is their policy? Does the CEO actually know what kind of work is happening in diversity? So I'm going to start with just taking a few minutes and talking about the landscape. And I don't know what it's like at RPI, but let me just start with some of the data. And this is from the NSF, and I will say that what the data I'm presenting is, NSF tends to fall a couple of years behind, but for women's degrees, at the top is all of science and engineering, and there are fields where women are pretty prevalent. But if you look at computer science, which is towards the bottom, it's still less than 20%. And what's more important is that at this point, it has held pretty constant for a while. We have not seen any continuous rises. If you look at African American bachelor's degrees, they have been flat and have in more recent times been actually going down. And then finally, Hispanic or Latino bachelor's degrees have been going up, and there's been a trend to go up. So that's who's graduating from school. It's important to know what's available as you think about it, but one of the things that I think is most important is to retain people once they get into companies. And so here is some publicly available data from a number of different companies that I have compiled. And here's the thing that people don't say. This varies a lot from company to company. So as you talk to the many organizations, you want to ask about this. So in this case, women varies from about 15% of the technical workforce to close to 30%. Cisco is on the left, to my left, and Slack is on the far right. For African Americans, it is also true. This varies a lot. So you look at Facebook, which is far to the left, and it's 1.5%. And then go far to the right is Apple, which is closer to 6%. And then finally, Latino and Latina representation for 3.5% to 10%. So why am I showing you these three numbers? There is actually a lot of other numbers, and this talk is really focused on what we call underrepresented groups in the overall workforce, which women are considered an underrepresented group because the people in the workforce as compared to the population are significantly different. African American is also underrepresented, and Latino, Latina. American Indian is also represented. There are some groups, Asian Americans in particular, that are well represented in the technical workforce, but are less represented in the leadership. So it varies a lot, but it's important to look at your data and to understand what companies are doing. So I'm going to talk about some of the actions that companies can take, and then we can talk more. I'd love to hear your questions. I'm an engineer. I love data. You want to see where you are, where you want to go. And so what you measure, you will change is really important to me. Look at your data, understand your representation, and you want to hold your leadership accountable. The second is to recruit inclusively. Too many places go to the same place to do their hiring and don't broaden the group that they're recruiting from. The third is to retain the people you've gone to such trouble to hire. I've talked to so many people who are working on programs to expand the number of people who come into computer science and engineering. But all too often, they join these companies and they don't feel like they belong and they leave. It's probably, in my view, one of the key problems. And then, of course, embracing inclusion overall. So let's just start with what you measure, you will change. I heard a podcast just the other day from the HP president, and HP has a culture of inclusion that goes back to Bill and Dave. But what he said is, as he was reflecting on the overall makeup, he realized that there was a real underrepresentation in the executive level of African American. And so the corporate goal for this year was to increase that. And I think that that's one example of setting precise goals about where you want to go. I've watched with admiration what Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, because many people who joined Microsoft did not feel like they would belong, but Satya has been systematically overhauling the entire organization. He has changed the representation on the board, on his leadership team. He holds his leadership accountable. Every year there's goals about making progress, and he really embodies what I'm talking about from a leader, because he doesn't just do the easy things and talk about it. He does the hard. He creates the hard programs. I have a lot of admiration for him. The second is to recruit inclusively. All too often, if you keep going back to the same place to recruit, you're going to get the same group that you've been getting for many years. Many companies come to the Grace Hopper celebration to recruit a broad group of people. I think there was about 360 companies at last year's Grace Hopper celebration. But there's many other places that you can go to recruit. I mean, the Tapia celebration of diversity and inclusion, diversity in computing, is another conference that has a broad set of people that attend. The Society for Women Engineers, the Society of Black Engineers. These are places that companies can go to recruit. It's also important to look at the schools where you go to recruit. And I know that for you, there's a certain set of companies that come to RPI every year. I would encourage you to think about what are the other companies, where can you reach out? And also to consider attending some of these conferences that I mentioned, because you will reach a broader set of companies. Okay. And it's just important as you think about the people to really reach out to a very broad set of people. I'm inspired every day as I learn from the students. This is just a number of them that are part of the grade group that I mentioned. But companies that want to create change want to reach out more broadly to recruit. The third point that I want to make is to retain the people you've gone to such trouble to hire. So many people, I mean, I've been going through these interviews, and I'm just dismayed by people who have gone to all this trouble to get a computer science or engineering degree, and then they've worked at places where they just don't feel like they belong. It's important for companies to really look at their workforce and understand how to engage with all people who have joined their company. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of companies that have really made a difference. The first is GoDaddy. When I first started working with GoDaddy a number of years ago at the Anita Borg Institute, my board was horrified. They had a terrible reputation because of their ads of women on the Super Bowl ads. And but the CEO Blake Irving, who is now stepped down, was really committed to looking at his workforce along with the entire company. And what you see here are statements that GoDaddy made from their public website of ideas that they are committed to internally. One is active transparency. I've talked about what you measure, you will change. They regularly release their representation data, but also looking at the salary data, the pay equity, not the salaries of everybody, but actually just looking at the pay equity of all their employees. And the second point is to confront unconscious bias. Here's what I have seen. Many companies feel like the way that they're going to look at diversity is to release unconscious bias training to their entire organization. But many people who take unconscious bias training, because I'll realize that they are biased. All of us are biased. And at some level, unconscious bias training can give permission to look at your own biases. But what GoDaddy did was look at the bias that are present in their people processes, to look at their performance reviews, make sure that there's explicit criteria for being promoted, to look at the ways in which people are evaluated and make sure that's consistent across the entire workforce. And they've done a great job in terms of creating a culture where all people thrive. There's a woman named Bridget Fry who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago. She's a CTO at Redfin. Redfin is a real estate company, but it's also a technology company. There's still very few women CTOs, but Bridget is very deeply committed as an executive to creating cultures where all people thrive. Part of it is to release the representation data and look also at pay equity across the board and release that annually. What Redfin has done is look at the programs that they deploy and evaluate how much they're having an impact on the people who work for there. And one of the things that's happened at Redfin is that they have really had a focus on women for a number of years, and the representation has changed. And so it has really gotten great. So they have turned their lens to people of color and looked at ensuring that they had broad representation across multiple ethnic backgrounds, both at the entry level, mid-career, as well as executive. They are also tying their executive bonuses to their goals around people of color. So those are two examples of companies that have really made a difference in terms of creating programs that they deploy, that they ensure that all the people at the company feel like they belong. The fourth point for many companies is to embrace inclusion. And I'm sure that you see this at the school where you're at, is that you want to embrace all the people who are around you, embracing their differences, learning from others, finding ways to understand how you are different than the people around you. This embracing differences and focusing on inclusion is so important to create a different kind of culture where all people thrive. And I will end with this idea that we know how to create cultures where all people thrive. And as you think about yourself and your journey and what kind of changes that you want to make, what do you want to do if you would reach out to the people around you, have conversations, find people who do not look like you, and understand what their perspective is. Take the groups that you're currently involved with, like the one that hosted this talk, and find ways to connect with other people. Talk to the faculty that are around you. They're supportive of this talk today, and I'm sure that if you asked to understand what their thinking is in terms of how are you going to do what you want to do, and I would encourage you to take risks, to understand that you can go for it, and to become comfortable being uncomfortable. Finally, that you find cultures where you belong and where that goes out of the way to make sure that all people thrive. And with that, I'd love to open it up to questions. Let's see. Stop sharing. And turn it back to Alexandria, and we can find out what kind of questions people have.
Thank you, Telle, for that great speech. If anyone has any questions, please send your questions into Q&A and we can read them out. Don't be shy, we don't bite.
So I see in the chat window there's somebody who has a question, Alexandria. There seems to be a couple of questions in the chat window.
So Julia is asking how to open the camera. I'm not sure if we're able to open people's cameras, but if she wants to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sweet. Thank you very much for the presentation. It is very encouraging for women in technology. I have some questions. So I'll tell you some of my background. I'm currently a master's student in information technology. I'm really grateful for RPI to give me an opportunity in IT. So some of my background is I went to a liberal arts school that was really encouraging for women in technology, but it took me 4 years to build that confidence. So I only took data structure at my last semester in my senior year at my undergraduate. So right now I've been scrambling to take all the IT grad and undergrad classes. On top of, I do have goals, which is I want to be a researcher in either data science or computer science. However, I feel my knowledge is really behind. And can you give me some advice on my next step? And where in actually, so I know there's some RPI faculties here. So where at RPI can people assist students that to take a look at their PhD application, and where in the United States can I find help at schools in higher level research? And thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think it's, I mean, as I said, I didn't find computer science until late, and so I started late, and I kept focusing. Many of the people I'm interviewing also find it quite late. I would just encourage you to be focused on the skills, and to continue to take classes, and it may take you longer, but understand what areas you really want to know about it, and continue to augment your skill sets with those classes. And I'm wondering if you could, in terms of the RPI faculty, perhaps you could connect with them offline.
So we have a question in Q&A. Let me read that out. So it says, for someone who comes from a privileged background and has not faced many of the issues individuals in underrepresented groups deal with, what do you think is the best way to get a better grasp of those issues so I can be a part of the diversity movement?
What a great question. I mean, that's just so, I mean, it's so important, and all of us need allies. I mean, we need to have people that come from what you're calling privileged groups, that people, certainly white men. It's important that all white men engage in creating change. And I would give you a couple of ideas to think about. One is to listen to, as you come to talks like this, as you come to groups that are put together or that are created of underrepresented students, to listen what their experience is. One of the things that I see of particular importance is when you have meetings where you have a group of people and you see that some people are just not speaking up, the shy ones. If you're leading the meeting, I would encourage you to call on all people to make sure that they have a voice. If you see that one person is interrupting somebody else, to go back to the original person. And I mean, a common scenario is, John, I appreciate the idea. I also appreciated it when Jane said it a few minutes ago. So understanding that all people should have voice in meetings. So those are two ideas. Listen to others, ensure that all voices are heard during meetings that you can help with. And thank you.
So we have another question. You say, you mentioned that you have to become comfortable being uncomfortable. Do you have any advice for pursuing or dealing with discomfort?
Yes, I mean, it's a lot of what my life has been is just being learning to be comfortable in my own skin. And the way, I have a couple of ways that I address that. I've mentioned a few of them. Finding people who I can talk to, that I can trust, especially people that I may not necessarily be working with them or in school with them, but that have similar ideas, similar goals. And so finding advice about about what behaviors to take. So for example, I had a job a few years ago where I just did not like my boss and I was ready to leave. And I did talk to a number of people who I trusted about what decisions I should make. And I ended up not talking to his boss because and understanding the consequences of that, but instead making a change. So finding people to talk to. Some of it is just learning to live with it, to recognize the discomfort and say, oh, wow, I'm not very comfortable. And just being with that discomfort.
So when you discuss company culture, sometimes there's a difference between overall company culture and team culture. How do you differentiate between these when you initially start that conversation and talk mainly to the individuals rather than the organization as a whole? Moreover, how do each of these affect how people thrive?
Right, that's a great question. I mean, and all you can do is ask. So as you're interviewing with a company, understand what the team dynamics are. So make sure that you talk to a wide range of people on that team and understand what the culture of the team is. But many people forget to also ask about the company culture, because in the long run, that's going to have a pretty profound impact on your experience at this company. What's nice is if the company culture is very welcoming, then it's much easier once you're inside to move from one team to another, so that you can, if it's not working out on your current team, you can find other teams that may work better for you. So the big thing is to ask a lot of questions. While you're in school, like you are now, also taking intern positions is one of those golden opportunities that you don't have at almost any other point in your life, because you want to try different places and understand what the differences are between multiple companies. That will help inform your decision as you get ready to make it.
So someone asked, how do you recommend becoming close enough with a professor to create a mentor relationship?
Good question. And there's a few things to consider. One is that there's often student groups where there's faculty sponsors. So showing up at some of these student groups, but especially if the faculty member is there, is a good chance to get to know them. I've seen that be quite effective. But as I mentioned in my talk, most of my mentors didn't know that they were mentors. And I would also consider putting together questions. What are some questions that particular faculty members might know something about, and showing up in their office hours and just asking questions about that and getting advice. The people who have become mentors to me, it's where I've asked for advice on a particular set of ideas that were important to me and just spent time with them.
So someone asked, by what measure will we use to say that underrepresented groups are no longer underrepresented? What needs to happen to deem ourselves successful in diversifying our technology workforce?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's actually a pretty precise definition of underrepresented minorities, and that's if you look at the general population, it's groups where the representation in the workforce is significantly different than the overall population. So just go through the three groups that I mentioned. So women are 50% of the population, but closer to 20 to 25% representation in the workforce. So that's why they're called underrepresented. African Americans are, I think it's 13% of the population, but they are typically 1.5% to 5% for the workforce. And Latinx or Latino and Latina, similarly, I don't remember what the population is, but it's about 12% of the workforce. Now, as a company, you want to look more broadly. So I mentioned that if you look at Asians, if you look at the technical workforce, they are typically larger than the overall population. But what my Asian friends would tell me is that they're not represented in leadership. And so it isn't so black and white overall. You really want to be able to look at the people and how they're represented throughout the company.
Yep. So Megan asked, Was there a common quality among your mentors that was particularly helpful to you as a young woman in the CS field?
Oh, what a great question. I mentioned my first important mentor, which was Rich Wiesenfeld at the University of Utah, and he seemed to he was supportive of me getting ahead. So he believed that I could have a great future, and so I think that was an important aspect of why he was such an important mentor. He communicated very broadly that I could do it. Unfortunately, as I've talked to many of the young people at the Grace Hopper celebration, they're still all too often being told you don't belong here. You probably don't want to study. You can't really do it. And so finding people who can be encouraging to that you really can do it is probably the single most important aspect of it. But then the second part that's really important to find in a mentor is somebody who has an expertise that you don't have. So somebody who can help you to understand, so how do you make a decision about your first job? How do you, what are the characteristics that you need to develop in order to get a promotion? What are the criteria you should be thinking about in terms of getting a PhD or working in industry? So those are the kinds of things that somebody might have an expertise in that is important to you along your career.
So what inspired you to be a part of the building of the Grace Hopper Conference?
Well, when Anita and I first talked about creating the Grace Hopper celebration, it's called a celebration for a good reason. There were still very few women who were wildly successful in computer science, and we just wanted to create a place where we could celebrate the achievements of so many of the women who really were making a huge difference. From the very earliest conference, there was always a lot of students, and having the chance for students to come and to hear the stories of women who were working in the field, who were researchers and doing great things. I mean, it really was this idea that we could make a difference by bringing these people together. And I still remember the first conference we had, it was a lot of work. It's like any startup, it was a lot of work. But being at the hotel that day, and I had worked in the industry for quite a few years at that point, but looking down on this sea of women and thinking, this is my tribe. It was certainly a life-changing experience.
I don't see any questions right now, but if anyone has any questions, don't be shy and questions.
So it seems like a lot of people want to understand how to engage at RPI. I would encourage either you or one of the faculty members, George, I know you're here, to talk about some of the ways in which students at RPI can be more engaged, some of the programs that you offer that might be interesting to the people on this call. including Julie, who asked the question first.
So from a faculty member's perspective, there's a number of ways that students can, get more involved, say, with research or just projects in general, which I'm sure a lot of students are already familiar with. So, RPI is the URP program, undergraduate research program, which allows students to do research for credit or sometimes pay. That can be applied to, graduation requirements for undergrads. I'm sure a lot of master's students are already involved in some respect or another with research, so it's probably not as big a concern for them. But there's also ARCOS, Rensselaer, pretty much open source software. It's for the Center for Open Source Software, which essentially just has many different projects that students can get involved with, programming and development of open source software and stuff like that. So in terms of research and projects, those are probably the two biggest things where students can easily get involved and establish, say, relationships with faculty. I've had a number of students do URPs. One student did one, kind of continued for pretty much almost 2 years, and they're currently in a PhD program. So that was a very good experience for him specifically. It established a good relationship. I wrote some nice recommendation letters. He got one of the RPI undergraduate research awards from that. So that was a pretty good experience for him. Other students should definitely kind of pursue that because especially if you're looking to go to grad school, that's definitely something good for your resume. Having that research experience is definitely very beneficial.
Yeah. From the student side, even outside of academics, there's a lot of great opportunities with different clubs and organizations. There's ACMW, which is Women in CS. There's AWM, which is Women in Mathematics. There's NESB, SHEP. They run the career fair, but there's just a lot of different organizations that people can join. So if they're interested in being part of that, we run a lot of events and you can reach out to the people in charge of those clubs. And then Fiona asked if she could unmute herself to ask a question.
Okay.
I believe she has the ability to unmute herself. If not, if Professor Slota could unmute her.
Who am I unmuting?
Fiona.
Hi there. My name's Fiona Clark, and I know I hopped on a bit late, but I just sort of wanted to take this opportunity to ask you a question, Telle. And I know you probably get this question a lot, I'm sure. But I was wondering, as like a woman in the STEM field, how did you make yourself stand out? I don't know if you discussed this earlier on in the call, but I was unfortunately at another meeting. But if you could answer that, I'd be interested.
Yeah, great question. It's important to, you're right, stand out. So there's a few things. What George mentioned as a student, you want to get some results, some experience under your belt so that you can say that you have that kind of experience and you can get recommendations. That's one way to help you stand out as you apply for graduate school. If you are working as an engineer, as a computer scientist, STEM is pretty broad, and so those are the two places that I have the most experience. What you want to do is deliver results. I worked in the startup world, and that is how I got ahead, was that I was able to to take the time and deliver results and people noticed based on that. It's, I think there's a number of other skills. For many women in particular, you really need to figure out how to communicate well. You can do the best work ever, but if you can't actually articulate what kind of work you've done, it's much harder to get your name recognized and to get your work recognized. So those are just some of the things you should consider.
Thank you.
Hi, hi Telle. We met at Grace Hopper several years ago, and thank you for joining us. I just wanted to keep going on what Alexandra and George said, because and what you have said, deliver results is a crucial. But the important thing is to ask for problems, knock on doors, take the courses that are challenging, that are areas you're interested in, and say, hi, you got a problem to work on? I'd like to work on the problem. And don't be afraid to start doing something simple. Because if you prove yourself on something simple, you get harder and harder problems and you do better and better and get yourself noticed. We all pretty much universally want students to come see us. But remember, those classes are big. So you just have to just take the chance. The worst thing that somebody can say is no. And as I told my daughter when she was looking for research positions, there were 50 faculty in her department. She talked to 50, got 4 offers, and all she needed was 1, right? So you're not going to be a very good baseball player, but you got a research position. The other thing I wanted to mention is ARCOS, and I really want to praise the leadership of ARCOS. The demographics of ARCOS are actually much better than the university demographics. I don't have them right in front of me. And it is a very welcoming community to try new ideas, to explore, and it's very entrepreneurial. And I very much like Telle's entrepreneurial attitude. Just go try something, get it done yesterday, and do your best. But come knock on our doors, please. Thank you for your time. And thanks for joining us, Telle.
Oh, see? I mean, go knock on their doors. They want you to, and they've got a lot of students, so you have to keep knocking. But thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that.
So it's 12 o'clock, but we had a lot of really great questions, and thank you everyone for coming. Is there a contact that we can use if people have additional questions directly to you?
Sure. Well, as you know, my email address is tellew@gmail.com. So you can always reach out to me if you have questions. I have a website, tellewhitney.com. And if you forget my email address, you can go there, and there's a way to contact me through the website. Thank you so much for having me. It's just it's very rewarding to hear all these questions and to have a chance to talk to all of you.
Yeah. Thank you again. And then we have the link here again for where the recording will be posted. It's on the new CS Cloakroom channel on YouTube. Yeah. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you for being here, Dr. Whitney.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.